Hey there, leaders. Listen, most of the challenges that you're dealing with right now, it's not about strategy. It's about people. People who think differently, communicate differently, and see the world through a completely different lens than you do. And this podcast, this is where we go underneath all of that. Not just what's happening on the surface, but the conversations and the decisions and the moments that actually shape how we lead, work, and grow. Listen, the world can feel chaotic these days. We see it every single day. And this is not a place where we're going to add to the noise. This is where we're going to simply rise above it, where we learn, where we challenge how we think, and where we simply get better. I'm Stephanie Chung, corporate executive, keynote speaker, and author of Ally Leadership: How to Lead People Who Are Not Like You. And over the course of my career, I have had the opportunity to lead teams and drive growth at companies like Wheels Up, Bombardier Aerospace, and American Airlines. And now as a keynote speaker, I get a different type of access, a different kind than most. See, I now get to sit in rooms or be on stages or behind the scenes with some of the most influential leaders and thinkers in the world. And most valuable part is not always what happens on stage. It's the real conversations, the off-the-cuff moments or the honest insights, the things that people say when they're not performing, but they're reflecting. See, those conversations have helped me grow. And this podcast, this is a way for me to bring you into those conversations. So together we're going to learn from people who do not think like us or lead like us or even live like us. So welcome to Not Like Me. And I am really, really glad you're here. All right, leader, I am sitting down with my good friend, Dr. Brad Johnson. Woo! I'm so excited. And today we're going to talk about men as allies. So one of my favorite people talking about my favorite subject. Brad is a clinical psychologist. He spent 30 years in the Navy. Thank you for your service. And he has been studying leadership and mentorship and how men show up in the workplace for a really, really long time, y'all. So he's also the author of Good Guys and Athena Rising, and another book that he has coming out called Fair Share, which we'll talk about later. So this is not just theory for him. This is his life's mission. Brad, you have seen where men get this right and where they perhaps don't always get it right. So today we're going to get into what leaders need to understand and what they need to do differently, and in order to move this whole project forward, which is men being allies for women in the workplace. So are you ready?
I am ready, Stephanie. Let's do it.
All right. I got to tell you, just on a personal note, y'all, before we get started, Brad is somebody I have a tremendous amount of respect for. Not only is he a good guy, which is interesting to write a book called Good Guys, but he's actually just a really giving man. And so I appreciate, Brad, how you and Dave have supported me and my work. And together we're going to change the world. So, being able to have men support women in the workplace is, I think, sometimes can be a mystery for some people. So hopefully we can demystify it today. And then we've got other people who want to do it, but perhaps don't necessarily know how to do it well, or maybe don't have the confidence to do it well. So I'm expecting big things today, Brad. So again, just on a personal level, thank you for being here. All right, my friend. So here's my first question. Let's first talk about allyship. Let's make sure we're all on the same page with this, right? So how would you define allyship, just in its purest form, if you will?
Yes. Yeah. So let me just preface this by saying that everything that I'm going to give to you contextually really comes from all of my research with David Smith, which is focused on gender allyship, right? How do men show up as better partners, better colleagues with women in the workplace? But all of these things we're talking about can map to any other marginalized group, whether it's race or my colleagues who are LGBTQ. Pay attention to some of these tactics, and I think you'll see they apply to other groups. So what is allyship? Number one, well, let's talk about what it's not. It's not about doing something for in this case, women. It's not about men showing up and rescuing or deciding what women need and then sort of offering them this gift. This is all about coming alongside. It's about partnership. It's about collaboration. It's about going there together, right? And that's going to be the mantra today.
Mhm.
So, three levels. If I'm talking about allyship, I think about interpersonal, right? I want to show up in the workplace and hold myself accountable in my relationships with women, right? So I'm all of these interpersonal behaviors that really make the workplace more gender fair, like world-class listening and avoiding assumptions and passing the friend test with women. Then there's public. This is harder. A lot of men will tell you this makes me a little scared. I got to put skin in the game. This is about holding others accountable, public allyship. So, confronting other men, engaging when you see men engaging in sexist behavior, maybe something inappropriate. Do you step up? Do you loudly advocate for women? These are the things that are a bit harder. And then finally, systemic. Are you willing to actually hold your workplace accountable? Do you ask about why do we do this way? Is there a way we could change policies and practices to make the workplace more gender fair? That's really where you begin to see significant change. This is getting to the structural.
I love it. I love it. And I'm gonna zone in on one in particular because this is a question I wanted to ask you. And since you brought it up, we're gonna go deep and wide right now, right? Which
You
is
bet.
you called it public. But the question that I was gonna ask you is so often people talk about the positives, right? As to why we want to have diverse teams. And which is great. But what we don't spend enough time talking about is perhaps instead of the pro, what's the con? Right.
Mm.
And so for you specifically, because you focus in on men and women in the workplace, I would love to hear from you, Brad, what is the con to being a male ally or a man who's an ally for women? Like, what's the con? And you called it public and you touched upon it, but kind of go a little bit deeper. Let's be real for people out there.
Let's be real. So, I don't, con is kind of interesting. Let me frame it as challenge, right, for men. If we're talking about public allyship, men get pushback at times. Men will tell you they suffer the wimp penalty, for example, or they're afraid of violating the bro code or losing their man card if they actually use their voice and disrupt, promote women, ask difficult questions. So that's a challenge. I think that's an opportunity for courage, but some men will say, that makes it a bit challenging. Then, of course, there's the whole issue about how you show up. This can be a con. If I show up and, maybe go to a women's event in my organization or go to the women's ERG meeting, do I show up and listen? Or do I show up and start mansplaining and, trying to take over the conversation, trying to represent women in my organization versus collaborating? Men can get this wrong, right? It's a wrong optic. And then I think the final con is, do I do this work performatively? Meaning, do we just have tea and cookies and a panel on International Women's Day and call it good? Or do I hold my organization accountable for gender fairness throughout the year? Do I hold myself accountable for this? So I think getting beyond the performative is going to be key to doing this right.
Well, you know what I love about that? So there's 2 questions that I have from there. First of all, I'd never heard of wimp penalty. So I like it. But I won't use it, I promise. But losing the bro card, and yeah,
Yeah.
that's a big deal, right? And
Yeah.
so how do you, and yet still being in that whole performative mode, which, by the way, for anybody listening, when you're in a performative mode and you're talking to anybody from a marginalized group, it's almost like we have a sixth sense. We know when you're in the performative mode. So you're not doing anybody any favors, right? So either don't go in that mode or just don't go in the room if you're going to find yourself in that mode because we're going to spot it really quickly. But the one thing that I wanted to ask you is how do you break the habit for men of mansplaining. Like, I think that this
Mm.
would be super helpful for even women to know because sometimes you're right. Men may not necessarily realize they're doing it because it just may be the habit that they've got, and yet it has to be broken, right? And so how do you when you're training and coaching and teaching men how to be better allies, what are some of the steps that you do, Brad, to help them get out of that habit of mansplaining?
Yeah. Well, so this is such a great question, Stephanie, and I think there are many ways that I could do this. Number one, if I am willing to hold other men accountable, right, getting to that public allyship, I can notice this first of all. A lot of men might not notice mansplaining when it happens, but I can self-educate, know that this occurs, and then notice it, and then maybe pull this guy aside after the meeting and say, "Hey, brother, are you aware that she's an expert in this topic and you were just telling her about her job or about her expertise? Really don't need to do that." And I can point it out, right? The carefrontation.
Yeah.
I don't want to alienate him. I don't want to break a friendship, but I want him to know he needs to be better.
Mm.
So I can do this, offline after the meeting, or I can do it in the meeting. I can say, I'm glad you, Bob, are pointing out Tanya's expertise on this topic. So lots of ways that I can disrupt. Um, I also, think there's an opportunity to show some humility in that moment, right? If I notice, for example, that a colleague who happens to be a woman is being interrupted frequently, which happens daily in most organizations, I can go to her after the meeting and just say, "Hey, Stephanie, I'm noticing you have these great ideas, but people keep interrupting you. It's pervasive. Are you noticing it or experiencing it too?
Mhm.
How can I collaborate with you so that it doesn't continue?" Versus, "Hey, here's what you need to do. Do just what I would do." No, not the right optic. I want to ask you what would be most helpful. I don't want to rescue, don't want to mansplain, but I certainly want to collaborate with you to mitigate this issue.
That's so good. And, just speaking from a woman's perspective, that goes a long way because to your point, you're not saying you need to do this and you need to do that. It's like, hey, how can I help? I've noticed it and I want to help. I'm a friendly, if you will, right? You're your friendly, your friend or foe. And so you're
Yeah,
presenting yourself
yeah.
as a friendly, which is fantastic. I love that. I love that. So now let me ask you this, right? Because I want to even continue on that a little bit more. What would you recommend for women? Right? So if someone's mansplaining, because this just happened the other day, I was speaking on stage and it was a whole lot of stuff going on in the green room, and I could feel myself wanting to reach across the table and choke the guy out, right? Because I could see where he was going with it.
Sure.
But so how do you suggest for women that when it's happening that we use that power for good, right? Because our instinct will be to flare up because it's annoying and it happens to us a lot. But what would you recommend as somebody who studies and researches this particular avenue? How could we do
Yes.
better? Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. So let me just use one sort of facet of the whole mansplaining thing, to answer that. So, in all of our research, Stephanie, so many women said they would be in a meeting, they would share a brilliant idea, creative idea. Uh, People respond with, "Yeah," and 15 minutes later, some dude in the room says almost the same thing.
Yeah.
Really, kind of co-ops her idea, repackages it as his own. And then everyone in the room's like, "Wow, Brad, great idea," right? So women, this happens so often, women have words for it like bropropriation and
Mhm.
heap eating and imitating,
Mhm.
and so if I see this going on, women, first of all, can disrupt this by just saying, "Hey, I'm glad you like my idea." Other women can lean in and amplify her idea the minute it comes out of her mouth, right? During the Obama administration, women were doing this for each other in cabinet meetings and other significant events. So I'm not going to let somebody else take her idea. I'm going to attach it to her right away. So women can do this. One of the problems for women is that when they disrupt, when they say something, they tend to get penalized in a way that I don't as a male. So I also want men to step up and notice bropropriation and mansplaining and disrupt it. "Hey, Bob, Yeah, that sounds like a great idea, but how's that any different than what Stephanie said 15 minutes ago? I'm a little confused, right? Just ask that Socratic question. Or, hey, Bob, I'm really glad you like Stephanie's idea. Lots of ways we can disrupt this as both men and women, but I just want to acknowledge women pay a little more of a penalty. They may suffer, for example, lower leadership evaluations when they're the one always having to call that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I know. Trust me. That's a very, very good point. But I really like how you asked the question. Tell me how that was how that was different than what Stephanie just said 15 minutes ago. That's powerful. That's a really good takeaway for any woman or for anybody. But you're right, men. It's really this is the way that I like to describe it is this is men's time to shine, right? Like you want to
Yes.
be a hero, you want to have, the courage and just be looked upon from a woman perspective by us looking at you as like, putting you up there at that putting you up there because I feel like sometimes men feel like we're kind of pushing you down a little bit. But this is your moment, right? These are the things that you can do to easily make women go, "Oh man, I respect that and I respect you." So I love that. This is their courageous moment. Now, you've
Yeah.
been in the military for a long time, or you were in the military for a long time. And I also know that you were on in advisory board to help mentor women in special forces and things of that nature. So let's talk a little bit about what do you see as the difference, Brad, in regards to allies for women in the workplace versus women in the military?
Yeah, I think there's an awful lot of parallels, Stephanie. I think if you can master a lot of these terrific allied behaviors and skills, you're going to find that they map almost any place. I will say that in the military, especially at the current moment, where there is leadership, unfortunately, in our military, sort of bent on erasing women broadly from the military, questioning whether women even belong. This is sort of in my view, sort of a litmus test moment for men to step up as collaborators and colleagues and allies with women who happen to be warriors in the military. And this requires you to put some skin in the game. I have to ask hard questions. What do you mean women don't belong in combat? Women have been in combat for the last decade plus in almost every branch of the military. Where's the evidence for that? Where's the evidence that women are performing at a very high level? Are you willing to call this out? Are you willing to ask the hard questions? So I think this is, a moment for that public allyship. And I realize, given the structure of the military, men can feel a little bit reluctant to do this or a lot reluctant for fear of violating chain of command and, all of these other things. But I think you find the same issues in law, in tech, in venture capital. There are headwinds for men who lean in. And I think this is part of, courage. This is part of courage and leadership. This is a moment for you to be seen, be heard, and ask the hard questions.
I love that. I love that. And it's interesting coming from the aviation industry, we definitely deal with it as well. And there is
Yeah.
a lot of overlap between military and aviation because, especially in the pilot arena, where they were probably in the
Yeah.
military and then came over into aviation. So I completely agree with everything that you're saying there. And so it makes me think of though, Brad. I feel like with all of us who are doing purpose-driven work, right? And you,
Yeah.
of course, this is certainly this is a big deal and certainly has the ability to change the world, not just the workplace, if we can get this right. But I'm curious, what is it in your life? Because I personally feel like everybody has that moment where something clicked and it made them go, you know what, this isn't right, and I'm going to do something about it. And so for you, having this passion to be a man and also mentor other men on how to be good allies in the workplace for women, what is it that happened in your life? Like, where was that pivotal moment for you, Brad? What happened? What was the situation? I'd love to hear about it because that helped obviously pivot you from what you had probably seen and what was normal for
Yeah.
most men.
Yeah, happy to share it. And I'm also going to just preface this, Stephanie, by saying that in all the work my colleague Dave Smith and I do in this area, we often remind men that you have to get comfortable with your why. And I think you're asking me about my why.
Yeah.
Why are you doing this work? Why does it matter for you? And I think any leader worth their salt, especially one who has majority identities like I do, has got to be ready to share their why. And so for me, it really begins with a personal. And I think this is really important that leaders are comfortable sharing their personal why for gender equity or any other kind of fairness in the workplace. So for me, my personal, I have one sibling. It's a sister. She's 3 years younger than me. I got my start professionally in the Navy as an officer, clinical psychologist in the Navy. My sister followed in my footsteps. She also got her PhD, went into the Navy, and I have had a front row seat for 30 years watching my sister encounter headwinds as a woman that I never encountered myself. For example, no one ever tells me I should smile more. No one ever tells me, if I give very direct feedback to somebody that I'm abrasive, right? These are part of these things are they're her daily experience as a woman in the military. So over 30 years, talking to my sister, it has been an education on how women, even in the same profession with the same personality style, in terms of my sister and I, we're very similar in how we show up. She encounters things I never do. So I think that was my eye opener. And then there's also an academic piece. I have spent my research career looking at mentoring relationships. And so I've seen the data that women don't get great mentorship. They have less access. They certainly get less loud sponsorship. So I've always been curious about this, right? In male-dominated organizations, why don't men lean in? What is going on? What keeps us on the sidelines? So I think it was both the personal and the academic
Mhm.
curiosity got me started down this road.
I love that. You know, it's funny, I've been doing some research on curiosity as well, just for my own work, on my stuff, how to lead people who are not like you. And since I have an actual scientist and researcher here, I'm gonna ask you this question. Is there any research or correlation, whether it's, genetics, neuroscience, anything, like, why are some people allyship, they get it, it's easy, it becomes part of their why, and why do some folks struggle? Like, because when you're in it, it just seems like the obvious, right? Like, why wouldn't anybody just want everybody to, have a fair shot? It's kind of the gist of it, right? And yet there's so much resistance and reluctancy. So I'm curious, since you're a researcher and this is your life's work, is there any research that you have found or you can share with us that shows, is there a genetic disposition? Is it cognitive disposition? Is there, like, why do some people they get it and some people don't get it, right?
Yeah, yeah, good question, Stephanie. And I want to preface this one by saying, hey, don't let genetics give you a free pass for
Mhm.
not leaning in. But to answer your question, there actually is some interesting data. I think allyship is facilitated if you have really, really good emotional intelligence.
Mhm.
And there's data showing about 43% of trait empathy or trait emotional intelligence has a genetic connection. So if you happen to have received more of that, trait EQ, then you probably are going to have an easier time leaning into the interpersonal side of allyship, the listening, the genuine sort of cultural humility, the bias for inclusion, the ability to manage my own emotions. All of those things may come much easier for you, but that won't let you off the hook because these things are things that I can sharpen. I can develop. I can work on my EQ. It may be a little harder for some of us than others. I don't know that EQ is necessarily going to make public allyship easier. So, boy, this takes courage, right?
Mhm.
Disrupting, putting some skin in the game, calling things out. But I do think on the interpersonal side, yeah, I may have a benefit or a bump up if I happen to have some empathy that comes more naturally to me.
I like that. I like that because it's funny. You had mentioned the word curiosity earlier when we were talking, and it's great to know that those stats, and it makes sense, right? When you think if you've got a decent percentage of EQ, that this other stuff seems a little bit more natural. But I was thinking about this for just my own stuff, and when I think about curiosity, the example that I want to give, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Brad. I always give the example of, listen, when we're traveling, especially if we're traveling abroad or if we want to travel abroad, a lot of times we may want to go to another country because we want to experience their food or their fashion or their culture or their history or whatever. Something's causing us to go, you know what, I would love to go to boom. And when you
Yeah.
get to that place, you take on a spirit of curiosity because you don't know anything about the place. You've never been there before. And so you're asking the locals, you're listening, where does everybody go? Where do the locals go to eat? And then you're opening your mind, you're asking the questions, you're enjoying the encountering with people that you're not familiar with or who are not like you. And it makes the whole experience very different. But it's a mindset that you're going there with, right? Which is I'm going in
Yeah.
with the spirit of curiosity because I don't know what I don't know. I'm going to listen, I'm going to learn, I'm going to ask questions, then I'm going to take action. I'm going to go to where the locals go to eat and so on and so forth. So when I think of, for my work, ally leadership, ask, listen, learn, you take action. I always use the example of just being curious. And I use the travel as just as an easy example that I think most of us can wrap our heads around. So I have been noticing there is a lot of research out there about people who are just naturally curious. And I'm now curious, based on what you're talking about, is if those of us who are naturally curious also score higher in EQ, right? Because and I'm not necessarily going to do the research on this, but if you're a researcher and you got things to do and you're like
Yeah.
bored one day, Brad, it's going to be something for you to consider because I am very curious. I feel like people who would just have a curiosity about life or growth or learning or something, right?
Yeah.
They tend to be a lot more open minded, and therefore they want to by default include people because why is it a bad thing to include people? Right. And so, anyways, I loved when you said the word curious. And then, of course, when you gave me the statistics on the EQ, it made a lot of sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
I do think there actually is research definitely
Mhm.
looking, and I'm focused on men, of course, getting
Mhm.
better. So interesting research on men in the last decade or so who are getting promoted to C-suite roles across industries. And there's been a bit of a sea change in the things that get men promoted. I think all of them correlate with EQ.
Mhm.
They include cultural humility, authenticity, empathy, no surprise. But it's interesting to me in that research, curiosity is there as well. And I think curiosity is something that leads me in a relationship in the workplace to ask questions, right? To show up with that cultural humility and to convey to somebody, I would be really interested in hearing about how you experience the workplace, about your journey, about the identities, that are important to you. I can convey my openness and my genuine curiosity about hearing that.
Mhm.
And I think if you do that, a lot of this sort of terrific collaborative ally behavior
Mhm.
just comes so much easier for you.
Yeah, I would completely agree. So now I want to spend time talking about your new book that I
Yeah.
am excited about seeing and reading. And I know I'm a part of the book, so I'm excited about that as well. As soon as I get my hot little hands on it, I'm going to flip all the pages, read it, and then tell all the world about it. But, anyways, tell us about Fair Share. It's taken you a few years with this book. Like you've been passionate and focused on it, you and Dave, for a long time. So, why did you write the book? Tell us a little bit about the book, and we will include the link so people can pre-order and order the book as well.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie.
Mhm.
Well, so, Dave and I got our start on the interpersonal. We wrote the book Athena Rising, which was all about, hey, how can we show up as men in interpersonal relationships that are gender fair and inclusive with women in the workplace? Then we moved on to public with Good Guys, which was really kind of, holding men's feet to the fire, as it were, on the public allyship side. How do I hold other men accountable? How do I advocate loudly for women, which I may not be comfortable with? I think what we've recognized, what's very clear at this point, is we're never going to close the gender wage gap or the gap around advancement of women if we don't get to the structural and the systemic. So fair share is all about that. And I'll just give you some key takeaways from
Please.
all of our research here.
Mhm.
I think the biggest one is we have got to change the workplace, and this includes changing society to some extent, so that women can share equally at work because men are sharing more equally at home. So, one thing ought to be crystal clear to us right now. The data shows that even in dual career heterosexual relationships, she on average is doing at least double the unpaid work at home, caregiving, all the cognitive, emotional, mental load labor. We're never going to get to gender parity unless men are sharing more equitably at home. Why aren't they? Well, often the calcified 20th century workplace that we're still dealing with doesn't let men share equally in caregiving, right? Women maybe get substantial maternity leave if they're lucky. Men get very little, maybe a week or two. And even then, they're encouraged not to take it all, right? Because he's got a wife at home. Women are encouraged to take flex week or flex work rather, or allowed to do that. Men are not, right? Until we level the playing field so that workplaces normalize uh, caregiving leave, until we normalize everybody taking flex work sort of benefits and opportunities, until we get creative about childcare, right?
Mhm.
Finding, even as a private industry, ways to make sure that my employees have access to quality childcare. We're never going to get there. So this is a book about changing all our systems, all our structures, so that men can lean in at home. And a lot of men want to be more engaged with their partners and their children, and women can lean in more at work and take advantage of leadership opportunities.
I love that. I love that. And as you were talking, I was writing something down because I'm curious. Have you all done any research, Brad, about, having when men are more involved in your life, right, or the child's life? And so I'll take
Yeah.
myself as an example. I was definitely a daddy's girl. My father was very, very involved in my life, and him being in the military, as you know, there are times that you're shipped off for a year and then you come back, and just all those different dynamics. And so, but having a father figure, a strong father figure in my life, changed who I am, right? And so I'm curious if there's any research that, to your point, a lot of times some men don't have that either the knowledge or the ability to really be involved in their kids' lives in every
Yeah.
aspect. And so, is there any research based on fair share and what you guys are trying to get accomplished? Because you're trying to change all the systems, right? Not just the
Yes.
workplace.
Yes.
But is there any data that shows how children are impacted when the father is involved?
Oh, so much. And I
Mhm.
wish we had 2 hours for this
Yeah,
podcast, Stephanie, because that's how much we would need to share all this data.
yeah.
Lots of evidence that when both parents are allowed to be more engaged in caregiving, and not just after the birth of the child, although that
Mhm.
period is very important, but ongoing, when both parents have the opportunity and the bandwidth to share equitably in caregiving, kids just do better. They do better emotionally. They do better academically. Uh, Girls, interestingly, go when they have a father who's much more engaged equitably in caregiving. They go on into non-traditional careers. They're more likely to persist in their careers. Boys who see their fathers showing up in this very egalitarian way, much more likely to expect egalitarian relationships with their own partners later on. And they show up in the workplace ready to be allies with women, ready to be really terrific collaborators. So this makes a huge difference. We could create generational change in how women are included in the workplace simply by encouraging and promoting men to be more engaged in caregiving. One one last thing
Mhm.
I'm going to go ahead and call out here. we don't share enough with men what's in it for them. And there's
Yeah.
a lot of research we talk about in Fair Share on how men's brains change
Mm.
when they're much more engaged with their newborns and their children thereafter. They have better neuroplasticity, they have younger looking brains. The areas of the brain that really are responsible for empathy tend to get much more active. And then I get to take that stuff back to the workplace, right? And I'm a
Mhm.
better employee. I'm a better collaborator with my colleagues. So,
Mhm.
boy, it's a win-win for men, women, and the organization.
That's amazing. Wow, you should have started with that, Brad. But guys get bigger brains. No, the
Better
brains are more
brains, bigger
adaptable.
brains. Yeah.
I love that. That's powerful. That's really powerful. We'll definitely for everybody pick up that book. And again, we'll have a link so it makes it easy for everyone to be able to take advantage of it. But I love that. I can't wait for it to come out. Obviously, I've known about the book coming out in the past year or so, so I'm super excited. It's almost here. But the last question I have for you, Brad, and then I'm gonna let you go because I know you're a busy guy. What is one or two things, right, for anybody listening, especially for men or women? I'll let you decide, or both. What are one or two things that they can do to become better in this arena as far as allyship is concerned? Like practical, do this one or two things this week.
Okay, this week. So
Hmm.
something for women. Number one, women often ask us, "Hey, if I don't have allies that I'm aware of, maybe in my life or in the workplace, don't have men who are mentoring or sponsoring me. How do I go about getting started there?" I always recommend number one, the contextualize asks. So, approach power holders, men who might be good sponsors for you, and make the contextualize ask. Hey, I saw you had this experience. Could I get on your calendar for coffee? I'd like to pick your brain about blank. Most people feel comfortable with that, and they'll say yes. One great meeting like that, one great conversation often leads to another. This is how organic developmental relationships begin. In contrast, don't go up to someone like that and say, "Hey, will you be my mentor or sponsor?" That feels like a lot more. I'm not sure what you're asking for. So give the context for that. Also, pregame, right? If you're a woman right now who's noticing that you tend to be marginalized in meetings, talked over, interrupted, not heard significantly, as you should be, go to some people that you identify as allies. These could be men or women, and share what's happening and do what I call the pregame, right? Before the next meeting, could we talk about how we're going to approach this collaboratively? Maybe you're going to attach great ideas I have to my name immediately after I offer them. Whatever that looks like, pregame it with people who you think might be great kind of collaborators in mitigating biases that are going on. If I'm a male, and especially if I'm a male in leadership, how about really listening to women? And I'm not, I'm not. This shouldn't be taken lightly. Far too many male leaders simply look at end of year engagement surveys or commitment surveys and call it good, or they think that they're doing okay when it comes to retention of women, but they don't listen to women. They don't have what I call listening sessions. They don't go to women across levels in the company and just listen. How's it going? What am I missing? Would you be willing to share about your experience? Do the listening and then make sure you follow through with what you take away from that and share it with the organization. Here's what I'm hearing from women about how they're feeling engaged or included, and here's some steps we're going to take to work on that.
I love that. So good. So good. I was taking notes. That's fantastic. So, Brad, thank you very, very, very much for spending the time. I know how busy you are. I know you've got a lot going on, and I'm honored that you took the time to join us on the podcast and share incredible wisdom, which was amazing. So, can't wait for the book to come out. We will definitely be promoting it and amplifying the message as soon as we get our hot little hands on it. And so thank
Yeah.
you again. Thank you so much. Is there anything that I should have asked that I didn't ask? Any closing comments that you have?
No, I just want to thank you, Stephanie, for all the work that you do and for being one of the key interviewees for Fair Share. So your wisdom has been incredibly instructive for Dave and I. So I appreciate you.
Oh, and I appreciate you, my friend. Thank you so much to you. Thank you for everybody for listening. And definitely don't let this knowledge go to waste. Knowledge is power. And literally, Brad just dropped some super wisdom bombs on you. So all of us can do something to make this world a better place. And we're counting on you to do that. So thank you so much for spending time with us. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to Not Like Me. Listen, if this conversation made you think, do not keep it to yourself. Share it with a colleague or send it to a friend or a loved one. Bring someone else into the conversation because growth doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when we learn from others, even when they're not like you. I'm Stephanie Chung, and I look forward to seeing you next time.